When I made the Foundational Falsehoods of Creationism video series, I considered including an episode disproving Noah's flood. But that series was meant to address all the different types of creationism, not just those based on the God of Abraham. Later, I considered making a subsequent series showing how different fields of study collectively disprove the flood myth. I never got around to it because I thought the flood story was such an impossibly ridiculous farce there was no need to make any videos to explain just how absurd that fable was. Surely everybody knew that already. But if 2016 has taught me anything, it is not to underestimate the stupidity of people in large groups. So this should be the first in a series of videos showing how meteorology, geology, anthropology, zoology, and even mythology each individually disprove Noah's flood. My presentations are usually based on arguments from my own observations, but this time someone else has done all my work for me. So this video will be based on a scientific article which was handed out by Christian teachers when I took a college course in historical geology. Just because you believe in God and Jesus doesn't mean that you have to go so far as to deny demonstrable realities of science. That was their first lesson. The article they printed out for the class was called Physical Constraints on the Noachian Deluge, submitted to the Journal of Geoscience Education in March of 1983 by two associate professors of earth science at St. Cloud University. At that time, Dr. Leonard Soroka taught introductory earth science, physical geology, and historical geology, while Dr. Charles Nelson specialized in oceanography and hydrology. Together they did something most scientists never do. They examined the Bible's claims scientifically. I mean, most scientists do that personally, but not publicly. Once they realize how childishly unrealistic those stories are, they see that none of the fables in Genesis can withstand even a moment of critical scrutiny. Since most scientists had already figured that out as children, they think the average grown-up must surely know better. So they don't publish papers debunking mythology because there's no need to. It is honestly too silly to warrant serious discussion among reasonable adults who understand physical realities. So just for the fun of it, these two scientists evaluated 4 natural sources of floodwaters, being rain, hydrothermal springs, and 2 types of cometary impact to determine whether a natural explanation was even possible. Sometimes scientists have to determine whether a possibility exists. Remember that the next time someone says that anything is possible, it's not. In this case, they determined that it would require a flurry of physical and chemical miracles because otherwise the Noachian flood defies the laws of physics, meaning that it is physically impossible. But first they looked at the rain because the Bible said it rained for 40 days and 40 nights. Considering the amount of water currently in the oceans is about 1.37 billion cubic kilometers, then in order to cover all the high mountains everywhere under the heavens would require an additional 4.4 billion cubic kilometers or a billion cubic miles of water. I have to convert the metrics since most of my target audience are Americans who don't understand science. So to flood the world the way the Bible said would take roughly 3 times the amount of water we already have. Where did all this extra water come from? And we know that it couldn't already be here because the land would still be covered now. Some have argued that it wouldn't take that much water because the earth didn't yet have mountains. They imagined that the effects of the flood were so cataclysmic that it shoved geologic plates together and caused these mountain ranges to appear. But the Bible says otherwise. It says there were mountains. It says there were high mountains, and that the water covered these all over the earth. But let's not forget that Noah was supposed to have landed on Mount Ararat, which is over 3 miles high. Even the smaller peak is an elevation of 2.5 miles. And remember that the way volcanoes rise is by piling up lava, which is typically over 1,000 degrees even underwater. So is there anyone stupid enough to argue that Noah landed on a volcano that was still in the process of forming?
Now somehow 15 cubits of water is supposed to cover Mount Ararat, which stands 2.5 miles high.
The problem is you're assuming Mount Ararat existed at that time.
So you're telling me that because Mount Ararat is a volcano.
Correct.
And you want to tell me that it just caused this volcano. So a 2.5 mile high volcano just formed just now, and you're going to land a wooden boat on it?
No, I'm saying it formed during the flood, under the flood waters.
Even if we allow that the volcano could have formed completely and then sufficiently cooled before the ark landed on it, there's still the problem of where creationists think the ark landed. This is the Jerusalem site, said to be the resting place of Noah's ark. In fact, several creationist sources insist that this vaguely boat-shaped rock formation is supposed to be the ark's remains. These people tend to be young Earth creationists, and they believe things can be fossilized very, very quickly, even without being buried, which is a whole other bunch of bullshit. But they think this pile of rocks is the Ark, and it's still thousands of meters above sea level. So we're still talking about 1 billion kilometers of extra water that had to come out of nowhere. But the flood had to be a lot deeper than that, because the Bible says that it rained for 40 days and 40 nights, and that it took another 5 months after that for the waters to recede until the tops of the mountains became visible. And another month after that before the Ark came to rest at this elevation, more than a mile above sea level. So if the peaks of Ararat had already formed beneath the floodwaters and the waters receded to reveal them, then the flood is still that impossibly deep. Either Eric Hovind is wrong or the Bible is wrong. So what's your next bullshit excuse, Eric? So we are talking about 1 billion cubic miles of water that would have had to come out of nowhere and would have to be banished back to the void whence it came. Remember that the Bible describes the earth as a flat disk covered by a giant crystal dome with windows in it, so that the sun, moon, and stars and all the heavens are contained within the expanse or concavity of this firmament, and above that there is only water, an inexhaustible supply of water pouring in from an eternal abyss. I guess we are to assume then that all this extra water would have to be pumped back out again through the fountains in the earth that don't exist either. It is a fact that the people who made up this model hadn't yet discovered that air was particulate matter and that displacement would therefore be an issue. So none of this could work unless the water was pumped back out and air was pumped back in. But believers tend to ignore most of what the Bible says anyway, and no one even tries to defend the firmament anymore, unless they pretend that it's not like a solid dome of molten glass like the Bible says it is. Maybe it's actually a hydrospherical canopy made of water vapor. If that were the case, then Drs. Nelson and Soroka say that atmospheric pressure would be about 840 times what it is now, and that it would be 99.9% water vapor, so it would be impossible for humans or other animals to breathe. And such a mixture of gases can't even exist as gases at temperatures humans can tolerate. There wouldn't even be enough nitrogen or oxygen to support all that water vapor as cloud droplets, and such clouds would have prevented nearly all light from reaching the surface. So if it was a water vapor canopy, it would not have allowed life as we know it to exist on the surface of the earth. Then we get into thermodynamics, an aspect of physics creationists often like to cite but never understand. Nelson and Soroka explain that as each kilogram of water vapor condenses, 2.26 million joules of energy are liberated. This energy is known as the latent heat of vaporization and is the source of energy that powers thunderstorms and hurricanes. So converting the water vapor to rain over 40 days would radiate about 10 to the 28 joules of energy worldwide, raising the atmospheric temperature beyond 6,400 degrees, making Earth the second hottest object in the solar system. The oceans would boil and the Ark would burn. Next we look at Walt Brown's hydroplate theory, which holds that God purposefully built a time bomb into the Earth, that he sealed 435 billion cubic kilometers of water under a slab of granite more than 20 miles thick, somewhere in the top 1,000 meters of the Earth's crust, and that it broke according to tidal pulling from the moon, meaning it would have broken at that time anyway, even if the people of the Earth hadn't pissed off God by then. So did he know in advance when he made people the first time that he would be so disappointed at them that he would want to kill them all and start over? Anyway, setting aside all the flaws of the hydroplate model, like how that water got into that impossible position in the first place, let's say it's hypothetically true for a moment and imagine what happens when the crust cracks and all that highly pressurized water erupts into the sky. So if all this extra water didn't come from underground, then the only other source is that it came from outer space. Now if it came in the form of a comet, it would have to be a ball of water ice 1,300 miles across. That's roughly twice as wide as Texas. That's not going to burn up in the atmosphere, especially when it's 1,000 miles thicker than the atmosphere. If it came in at roughly 10 miles a second, it would have an explosive impact of 12 trillion megatons of TNT and wipe out all life faster than the resulting flood would. So what about a cometary hailstorm? 1 million smaller comets would minimize the impact damage, but it wouldn't change the total energy of the whole mass together. These smaller comets would heat up and vaporize in the atmosphere, generating quite a lot of heat each. That many of them coming in all at once would heat up the atmosphere too. Nelson and Soroka say that the global temperature then would momentarily rise well over 12,000 degrees hotter than the surface of the sun. None of these suggestions have tried to explain where the water would go after the flood. We know that it couldn't have drained to some underground caverns because if such fissures existed, that's where all our water would have been already and we wouldn't have any oceans. So the next suggested hypothesis is that the amount of water is the same before and after, but that the excessive flooding is a result of tsunamis caused by a concert of large meteors hitting all the different oceans repeatedly. They calculate that the water in each wave would return to the ocean basin in just a few days. So to keep the timescale given in the Bible, Nelson and Soroka postulated a significant meteoric impact every day for 150 days to keep the continents more or less continuously inundated like the Bible says. As this water lifted up over the tops of the highest mountains and kept draining back into the ocean basins, this would generate a very large amount of potential energy, which would eventually take the form of heat radiating. Remember that the Bible describes the earth as a flat disk covered by a giant crystal dome with windows in it, so please, 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 shut up. Stop going whack, 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 whack. Please stop that. You're messing up my recording. The article they printed out for the class was called Physical Constraints of the Noachian Deluge, submitted to the Journal of... Shut up. The article they printed out for the class was called Shut Up, Bird. Water takes a long... Shut up!